get started. But I can grab one of those sheets too. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Starting my head. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to my presentation for the Reach Institute of Force and Leadership. I am super excited to be doing this presentation today and to kind of just show what I was able to do in this inquiry cycle and just kind of as a culmination of my growth here as a teacher thus far. This is our agenda. You're pretty much in class. Actually, sorry. Now you're in class with me. Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation. I'm so pumped to have you here. This is what we're doing today. I'm starting off with welcome, as well as a quick introduction of who I am. And then I'm going to talk about my CSTP, California Standard for the teaching profession, element of focus. I'll talk about my SMART people, and I'll go into all of that in a bit. I'll talk about what type of information gathering I did before my cycle. I'll talk about what I learned during my cycle, and then I'll talk about some next steps and takeaways, and then we will end with a Q&A section. Cool? Ready? Any questions? No? Okay. Who am I? You might be wondering. Behind this math is, oh, actually, sorry, this is me now. This is me. I am a high school math teacher here. I currently teach pre-calculus and AT calculus, AD, and BC. In the past, I've taught geometry as well as math game lab. This is my 4th year in education, as well as my 4th year at LPS. And I'm just a cool dude, you know. And who do I teach?
Very cool.
I teach many different students, but the students that I'm focusing on mainly today are my AT calculus, AD students. These are their beautiful faces. They're all seniors, and they're very special to me because I've taught a lot of them over the past 3 years. Like I said, I taught geometry, I teach pre-calculus, I teach calculus. A lot of them were my students sophomore year before the pandemic, and then were my students during the pandemic, the first year of it during distance learning, and then now again, my students here. The racial breakdown of the students in the class, 90% Latino students, 10% African American students. The general gender breakdown from campus is 19 female, 20 male, so pretty split in that way. I have 4 EL students and 2 students with IPs. The 4 EL students is a bit misleading though. Many of them are reclassified English language learners, but therefore we're currently not reclassified English learners. When I was trying to come up with what I wanted to do for my inquiry cycle, one of the big things that I was having difficulty with was thinking about the fact that students in my calc class are really having difficulty reaching mastery on assessments even after revisions. It's been a really hard year, and students coming into this year have had a difficulty just reacclimating to what it means to be students, reacclimating to what it means to have a full schedule, and then also reacclimating to what the rigor of what is necessary in order to be hyper successful in a course like AT calculus. It's hard stuff. I mean, it's hard for everyone. I'm not going to put anyone on blast, but like so many people don't take calc, like even who work here have not taken calc and definitely haven't mastered it. And it has taken me many years to get to that point. And also homework completion, we're all experiencing it's negligible. It's not happening. People aren't really doing their work outside of here. They come in, they're stressed, they're overwhelmed, and then they leave. So I thought, what if I could adapt and differentiate practice in class to meet students where they are and push for mastery? That's the kind of thing that I was really hoping for in order to really push students to do some hard stuff. Where I started from is just what I consider to be generally undifferentiated, rigorous practice. Like we have, it's a big yes. I have practice problems given to them, but it doesn't really show them anything other than they are AP style problems because I'm teaching an AP style course. So I have the students work on the problems. I give them an answer key. I'm like, go about it, try it out, let's go. And I even give them old free response problems from the AP exam in order to help them prepare. But there's not really much structure here. Because of that, I really wanted to focus on this element 1.4, using a variety of instructional strategies, resources, and technologies to meet students' diverse learning needs. Wherever they are, I wanted to meet them where they were and then use different strategies to help really get them there. I do think that I'm pretty strong at this in certain aspects, especially with regards to giving them resources and using different technologies in my classroom. I have several examples of some of the things that I use up here. I use Desmos in order to investigate new concepts as well as practice. I do these different circuit activities where they can go at their own pace to try out practice problems and self-check themselves. I do work on the whiteboards. I have video explanations of my work as well as online explanations and online activities for them to do. And I also have assessments that are aligned to rubrics that I've created that are then aligned to the major assessments for the course. But the place, this is missing some of my slides. The place that I really did want to focus on though was the instructional strategies portion. That portion of this element is something that I felt like I wasn't really engaging in deeply as well as some of my peers were, and in order to meet my students. In the Pear Deck, not many people have joined the Pear Deck. I was going to have you guess where I am, but I'm not going to have you guys. I will tell you. I have put myself into the applying and integrating categories of this element, mostly because I use some strategies, I use a ton of technologies, and I want students participate in them. They're not like sitting on the sidelines, they do engage actively. The main problem just being that students were using strategies, but they weren't really taking responsibility for what strategy they were going to employ whenever they did need that practice. So they come into the classroom, they do the things that were there, but it was mostly me saying, hey, you are going to do this. You are going to do this. And this year, full transparency, I've been incredibly overwhelmed in the sense of like taking on other responsibilities, doing X, Y, Z things that I haven't been able to think about targeted strategies to support specific students. So a lot of times practice was just general. Everyone is doing the same thing. We are all working on whatever. My goal was for me to move from applying and integrating to integrating and innovating, really focusing on these bottom portions where students are not just taking part in their learning, they are actively making decisions to support themselves, to not just learn material, but push them forward. And the main thing that really came to mind when it came to the instructional strategy that supports students is the dreaded word, for some people, differentiation. What I mean by that really is I wanted to take what I was working on in my classes and give students a variety of entry levels to practice the new things that we're doing in class in order to make sure that I'm meeting them. I keep saying that, really meeting them where they are, making sure that they're supported and making sure that they are able to engage deeply and then make those decisions for themselves as to what type of entry point they want. In order to go through this, I developed my SMART goal, which is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, realistic, time-bound, and equitable. My SMART goal is up here, and I color-coded it, even though I'm colorblind. I used colorblind-friendly colors. By today, I intend to progress from applying and integrating to integration and innovation. The goal was to provide students with options for practicing novel concepts in order to help all of them make a decision for themselves. The real big thing, I continue to say this, I teach seniors, I want them to make sure that they are doing what they need to do to be successful and able to identify for themselves what that means. I don't want them leaving here feeling dependent on me as a teacher or feeling dependent on educators in general. They are independent, really strong learners, and they should deserve to be able to know how to make that happen. That led me to my inquiry question. How can I provide, incorporate, and integrate options for instruction and practice to help students address their own learning needs and take responsibility for their own learning? Like I said, I started from just generally undifferentiated practice, right? It was just like, here's some practice problems. There were some basic practice problems, and then some of them got more complex. They're more test prep aligned. I used a curriculum that already exists. I was like, yo, let's just do what happens. But I do want to note, perhaps unsurprisingly, students did not engage deeply with this, especially if they were lost. If they came into class and they hadn't done some of the pre-work, if they hadn't done some practice, or if they missed a class period, they just sat there. Or they would try to engage, but there wouldn't be anything fruitful happening. Understandably, there isn't much to engage with. And so I did a little bit of a kind of walking tour, Google Drive tour, talking to different peers. I saw what Alex was doing in his class. And it's not just Alex that was doing this, but I looked at what he was doing with regard to group assessment. I saw that what was really cool was that the students were doing group work that was aligned to the type of assessment problems that they were going to see. It was not the assessment problems, but it allowed them to have an opportunity before they engage with the assessment, to engage with the material deeply, to engage with others deeply, refine their thoughts, and move forward. The practice stuff and the rubrics that they were using in order to receive feedback were aligned with their summative. And so that was something that I kept in mind. I also looked at the work that Evan did, especially last year in Algebra 2, with regard to group mastery quizzes. Again, really thinking about how the practice opportunities in class, this specific opportunity, and all the rubrics that he used were aligned and had a spectrum of abilities. It wasn't just like, oh, you did it or you didn't. It was like, okay, let's really track what does it mean to be successful, and really still being successful in that content could exist in approaching. And so I thought, okay, great, let me try to create some sort of opportunity for students to have those entry points. The AP problems are hard, so I started by doing, and this is what you'll see on the first slide, are the different types of practice problems that I would give students. I gave them what I call conceptual versus procedural problems. Procedural problems are just getting practice of the skills, executing, just trying out something. Whereas conceptual problems were deeper problems that were more aligned to the AP, if not actually just modified AP problems. I let students choose what they were going to do. The problem with what I did that first time in that cycle, in that part of my inquiry, was that assessments were still primarily conceptual questions. My assessments were still just asking those deeper questions. So if a student who chose procedural practice in class, they just ended up scoring worse than students who were doing the conceptual practice because they didn't get to practice what they wanted to, or didn't get to practice what would have prepared them for the assessment. It also then led to many blank and frustrated quiz responses. I have a quiz response from a student here who wrote, I honestly forgot how to do this problem. I feel like I need more time to be able to understand this problem. And that was not an uncommon type of response to that type of intervention. Some notes from my pre-inquiry or like very early into the inquiry. The quote that I just pulled is, I said, I want everyone to think for yourself. What would be more helpful practice? And so students chose the level 1 procedural problems because a lot of them are not doing their homework. They're struggling, so they are going to do what they think is the basic level to support them. But then I set students up to be unprepared for their assessments, which then led them to feel demoralized and then feel like, oh, I don't want to engage deeper in this. And that was incredibly difficult for me for many reasons. One, just as a general educator, and two, being a part of their math journey for this long, to not be setting them up for success was really hard. So I was like, well, let's do something else. I looked at other teachers, I saw what they were doing. I went to outside of my department, I saw what Billy Burnett was doing in US history. He suggests structures for them to use as opposed to mandating that this is how it's going to be done. And all assignments are generally scaffolded. However, students can choose to use those scaffolds or not use those scaffolds. But it's the same assignment. Same thing with Eliza in English 3. There's an optional support available to students to use. And there's also some sort of checklist to guide students' thinking and in order to guide their work. Really just thinking, what am I supposed to be doing in order to be successful? I thought, how can I expose my students to rigorous practice problems and content while also really just meeting them where they are in terms of their depth of knowledge? I get that this stuff is hard. I also get that if you didn't practice it, you don't know how to do it completely. And you wouldn't be able to just take a problem at face value. And so what I did then was what's on the other side of the handout, if you have the paper. I took questions like AP free response problems, and I gave students the option. You can either just do an AP free response problem as you would see it on the AP exam, or you can do a scaffolded AP free response problem. The rationale behind it is that I really do believe that all students should get to see the problems, like similar type problems to what they would see on the assessment. Not really like, this is the question you'll get on the test, but more so, these are the types of questions you will see. They are complicated, they require multiple steps. You have to think about the steps that you're doing. This is just an example slide of what I put up for my students when it was time for them to make a decision. We went through one practice problem and then I asked students, what would you like? You can make that decision for yourself. I previewed what the two options were, and students went up and chose the one that made sense for them. My goal also is really just to allow all students to attempt these rigorous problems and choose the access point that makes sense for them. Revisiting, like what I said earlier, was my goal. Again, I said pretty much the same thing I said before. Take a minute to think about what's more helpful. I gave them some time to make that decision. And then they came up, and in my post-inquiry notes, it's noted that most people chose level 2 here, which is the modified version. which is similar to what happened before, right? A lot of people didn't feel like they could be successful at first, and so they just chose whatever the supported version was. Alex, during the observation, got some notes from some students who either took the unmodified or the modified versions. Students who took the unmodified versions were feeling ready, wanted to see something that AP was like, and then also already understood everything that was going on, or said that they understood everything that was going on and wanted to attack the problem as they would on AP exam. Modified students who chose modified either felt lost, appreciated just the scaffolds in the process, or wanted some sort of support as they were doing it. One thing I want to note is that students in groups would choose one or the other in their seating groups, even though they were all working together. Some students would choose the scaffolded version, and some students would choose the unscaffolded version, and they would still collaborate throughout the process. That's actually what I have an example of. I have 2 students work who were in the same group. And it's harder to see here, but the final answer for both of them for the question is not exactly the same, but it is the same response in the sense that they both come to the same solution, meaning that this student was able to do the problem without the scaffolds, and this student was able to do the problem with the scaffolds. I really love this example. It's from a student who's had a really difficult time this year with feeling engaged and feeling bought into the course. A student I've definitely had for 3 years straight, who I have an incredible relationship with, but has had a really tough time. And she told me this today, which is she felt smart because she was able to solve the problem in a way that she hasn't felt throughout the year. It just made me feel at least like good in the sense that she's able to engage. And so many times her assessment ended blank, or practice problems ended blank, and this is not blank. And the rest of the packet also was not blank. So that was a thrill. Just revisiting the SMART goal here, really thinking about the fact that, am I pushing students in order to choose what's best for them and engage? And also, am I making sure those options exist? And am I looking at this engagement data and performance data? One thing I want to name is that I did not do the best job of looking at what my initial SMARTY goal was, which is performance data, in that the final assessment for this unit hasn't happened yet because of what I've delayed. And so I'm curious to see what's happening. But on formatives, things that we've done in class, just general exit tickets and general engagement or random calls, they've done an amazing job. In response to my inquiry question, I do feel now that students were able to choose the path that made sense for them while not being deterred by their choice, which is the biggest thing for me. You choosing a level 1 problem or a modified problem does not mean that you will be unsuccessful on an assessment, because that is clearly guiding you towards success on the assessment. The assessment will still look like that free response problem did, but now you have an idea as to how to approach those types of things. And so, did I make progress on my element? I'm going to say, like, yes, not a crazy amount of progress, honestly. I do think that students were able to take some responsibility. I wasn't like the main thing up here. I'm not like using an extensive repertoire of strategies. This is one thing. This is one step towards what's possible. But I did definitely grow in this aspect. I want to name, though, that like that standard and that element is just one part of what I learned from this whole process. 3 main takeaways. 1, students should continue to see rigorous problems. I believe that wholeheartedly. Throughout this whole year, I felt so intense about, should I lower the rigor of my course in order to, is that how I meet students? I feel like it's the biggest disservice to our students to not provide them with what an AP calculus course should be. And so I was like, I can't do that, but then I didn't know how to tackle it. But that was just a huge takeaway. It's like, they need to, they deserve it. Another huge takeaway is that practice should be meaningful and varied. The idea is just that things should be different. It shouldn't just be the same type of practice every time, because if students aren't engaging once, they're going to feel jaded and not continue to engage overall. And then final takeaway is, if practice is done in one way, assessments should generally also be aligned to that, which then goes back to me to be intentional about my backwards planning in order to make sure that I'm supporting students in that way. My next steps are to go through AP free response problems and multiple choice questions and create those guiding questions to allow students to continue to see those rigorous problems, but still have the supports in order to make themselves successful. I also know that different types of questions require different strategies in order to engage. And so I'm thinking about things like lightning round for those level 1 questions that shouldn't be taking a really long time and shouldn't be something that students are spending the same amount of time as someone who's working on a deep conceptual problem is. And also they will understand then hopefully the difference between those two types of problems. That one requires one type of thinking, another requires more in-depth, more group mentality type thinking. Or not mentality type thinking, group work mentality type thinking. The final one, and this is a big change for me moving forward, is I want to make sure that I'm including level 1 and level 2 problems in the sense of procedural and conceptual problems to go along with what I saw happening with Evan's rubrics, and I see happening in a lot of different rubrics around the school, which is just students can show levels of mastery, and just because they aren't able to do that AP free response problem does not mean they haven't learned calculus and they haven't learned calculus skills. And so I want to make sure that I'm including multiple types of those problems in order to allow students to also feel a sense of success when they're taking an exam or a quiz or any sort of assessment. That's most of this. I want to thank the Academy for everything they've done for me. I'm just kidding. I want to huge thanks to Alex. Alex has been. This is a picture of me and Alex from the escape room that we did as a math department my first years, very early on into our journey. Alex has been a huge support for me over the past 4 years. It's been insane. Even though he's like left me twice for children, I guess. Like Alex and I started off planning geometry together. My first year, Alex became my coach. My second year was my tip coach last year, and is my math coach, and just life mentor here. And I really appreciate him for everything he's done for me. I also want a huge shout out to Sophia. Also being an incredible support over the past 4 years. Also one of my main like rocks here, but also someone who supported me greatly my first year and has helped me see what being an educator for the long haul can really look like and empower me in that way. And I also want to thank all of you for coming here. I really appreciate each and every one of you for the support that you've given me throughout my journey, not just in this cycle, but also just throughout my educator career. It's meant so much. Is now Q&A time. So if people have questions, but yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Good. Timing's so good. Look at me. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? You can also share other ideas. If you have more ideas as to what I could do, or any inquiries like background. Yes.
I have a question, which is, and yeah, so like, how do you or how might you kind of wean kids off of the scaffolds so that by the time they get to the assessment, they can ask them, they can break it down. Like you've done such a beautiful job of like breaking down how to approach the problem. And so I'm curious, like, how do you help students like internalize that for themselves so that when they get to the free response questions that are conceptual, they can do that breakdown?
Part of this structure is coming from like quote unquote last minute work. We're learning these things before the AP exam happens in 2 weeks. And so looking forward, one structure that I do have in class are I do CFUs with peer revisions and then quizzes with me revisions, like me grading and then self-revisions and then exams. But so what I would love to do is for when we're practicing before the CFU is providing those scaffolds, and perhaps if a student asks for it, giving them that scaffold for that question type for the CFU only. And then for the quiz, not providing that scaffold, but them having had practice opportunities and one assessment opportunity with the scaffold. And then they'll hopefully at that point, having had multiple revisions and multiple times to see it, would be able to perform stronger on the assessment. And one thing I'm curious about, and I would love to be able to track next year, is if I can see students who do use it and students who don't use it, how do they then fare on the quiz and the exam, which is a pretty easy thing for me to track on a spreadsheet.
Thank you, Jerry. Congratulations. This is so awesome.
Thank you. Yes, Allie.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, what was the reason that you said like even after revisions, a lot of kids still didn't master it? Like, and how do you like improve that process?
Yeah, I can tell you what I did that I thought was right and I'm learning is not so right. I record so many videos of me solving problems, and I have so many things of me like writing out the steps like on just like answer keys. And then so what some students would do honestly is just go on and copy it. I would watch students when they were doing my revisions forums, and I worked very hard on them, but some students, even some of like the star students that we all have, would skip to the end of the video, pause it, just write everything down, and then hit next, and then like take a picture of that and upload it. Like they just did the things. And so what I was learning was it's a fine process if you commit to it. And I had students who committed to that and were engaging, and those students they've been growing, but they're the ones who are taking part of all the strategies. So this to me just felt like one like pretty easy, quick way to allow other students to then also engage deeper and get some mastery. It's something I'm still working on, but this is my current solution.
Yeah, so I know you said Alex kind of checked in the kids. Strategy that you included. Have you considered doing some kind of form of reflection process that would include kids kind of tracking their growth towards the unmodified version? And secondly, as you're thinking about like moving forward, what are other things you can include strategies that you could include in
Thank you. To answer the first question, which is about what kind of reflection activities could I have for students to engage deeper with this concept. One thing that I had started to do and then overwhelm caused me to not do it was I did have students track their mastery over assessments, and they would see, okay, on the CFU, I earned a 3 out of 10. And then on the quiz, on the same learning target, I got a 6 out of 10. Okay, great. And then had a tracker of like their growth, and they'd see a graph that would auto-populate to do that. What I would love to add to that and make sure that's like a really cemented structure that I'm using would be adding a portion that says like, did I use the scaffold? Did I not use the scaffold? And then did the scaffold, like if you use the scaffold, did it support you? And have them engage deeply with that in unit 1, and then have that build on as we go through units 2 to 8. The second question was about what are some other strategies that I'm thinking about for students to help them be supported. This is only my second year teaching AP Calculus, and I'm now truly feeling comfortable in what all the question types are that students could be exposed to. And so one project for me that won't take me that long because I thankfully know how to solve these problems is to go through, solve a couple, and see what the steps are that are necessary. Then make a log of like, when do we learn those in the curriculum? And then provide students with like what I would call like a problem type packet. But we will be filling it out together as we go through the year. So once we reach this type of problem, okay, now everyone, we're adding this to our problem packet. And then so then they can then refer back to their problem type packet to see, oh, I'm finding the area of R, which is one of the most common questions. I'm finding the area of R. Okay, great. If I'm trying to find the area of a region, where do I look? Oh, these are the steps I take. That's how I solve it. So that's an idea that I have, very similar to what illustrative math provides, which is the reference chart. And that's what I've actually been modeling after for another resource that I used this year. And I just kind of want to maximize on that idea. Like, oh, I see this problem, I do these steps. I see this type, I do these steps. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'd be curious to know more about how the group dynamics. You said that a lot of students were doing the practices in groups, and we talk about that alignment between assessment rubrics and the practice, and how what might be. Well, just share with me what you think about that dynamic of how you have groups doing the practice and how lead towards their independent work that they can do on their assessments. What do you think around that?
Yeah, with regard to group work and then individual work, the way that class normally runs is that students work with each other, they work on the practice problems, the hope is that they're collaborating. I have students work on the whiteboards, and I do this whole like, everyone stand up, let's stand up, let's do it. And so they have to physically move over to the boards and talk to each other as they're working. Then students take that initial check for understanding, which is an individual assessment. And they take those seriously and they do it. One thing that I am really appreciative of is that my students are academically honest, but that also means I get blank paper sometimes from students who were lost in that moment. But at least that's a check for me to see, oh, when they're doing that group work, I need to circulate to this group in order to make sure that they're like getting that support. The goal is in the future, I want to shift towards random grouping. That is a huge push in our math department specifically. We're really focusing on collaborative learning. And I, in full transparency, have not done as much work as some of our other team members have, but that's like my next step is to think, well, when the groups are random, how do we support those students? Because one thing that I'm thinking is that they will then feel accountable to others, because it's not just the same people they've been working with forever and developing what their dynamics are, they're having to engage with pretty much everyone.
And as a follow-up to that, some question about the, you mentioned before, identified ELs and then two with IEPs. What did you find as you went through the project in terms of the work you were doing, what's the differentiation and the changes and the impact of their work?
I think what's difficult is I would say my students who are ELs are some of my strongest math students and didn't need the scaffolds in the first place. And then also my students with IEPs generally. The two that I have are they're not, their IEPs don't seem or aren't related academically too much. It's based on other things. And so like they also aren't in much need of the supports. But one of my students did then like she works with a partner who's like incredibly strong at the work. But what was nice was she did take the scaffolded assignment. And so when she was engaging, was able to engage deeper than I've ever seen her engage before. And that was really exciting. And so I'm excited to tinker with this to see what's possible to support more students. And also knowing if I can build up these strategies, then more and more of our students can reach Calc with this sort of support without feeling like, oh, if I don't have the English skills or if I don't have this type of process skill that I won't be able to engage, they would be able to. Is the dream. I'm not gonna pretend like I'm perfect at it by any means or even close. But awesome. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for coming. Stop this recording. Stop. It doesn't listen to me. Okay. Yay. If you want snacks, they're